Chair Littlegren is jet setting, so you're stuck with me. So I'm calling this meeting to order. And the first item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. If there are no additions or corrections, we'll go. Excuse me. I'm in charge here.
Get out that gavel.
That's right. I probably need to use my teacher voice. If there aren't any corrections or additions, we'll go ahead with our agenda. And our second item is approval of the June 2022, oh, that's hard, Community Development Committee minutes.
Move approval.
Wolf moves approval.
Second?
Lindstrom seconds. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And we have our consent agenda. We have 5 items here. Is
Move
there,
approval.
Wolf moves approval? Anyone?
Second.
Lindstrom seconds. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carried. We'll move on to our non-consent item, number 2022-146JT, second quarter budget amendment. Heather Aagesen-Huebner, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Chair, committee members, and may I just say amazing job on the pronunciation of my last name. Like, I haven't heard you have to do it before, and that was 2 thumbs up on that.
Oh, thank you.
So Heather Aagesen-Huebner, Finance Director for Community Development and MTS. I'm here for a very routine Q2 budget amendment. It's really, really straightforward. So we're doing, the first thing we're doing is we're doing regular closing of projects. Before every budget amendment, we take a look at what projects are open. We close those that we can. This time we're closing 6 projects, and we're removing about $2.6 million from the capital program. Projects have been spent, very routine. We're also going to authorize, excuse me, a very large dollar amount, but it's a very routine action. So we're bringing in just over $22 million of state parks and trails legacy funds. So when there's an appropriation, it's on a 2-year basis. And so we brought in the state fiscal year 22 money last year. We're bringing in the state fiscal year 23 money. We do that the first meeting that we can after we hit the magic date of July 1. And then we can go forward and do grant agreements with parks implementing agencies, and we authorize spending back to July 1. So even though our processes take a little bit of time after the July 1, the parks agencies are essentially held harmless in that. So 90% of the legacy money is passed through to the 10 parks implementing agencies by formula. If you want to look at the specific formula, it's in the business item. So that money goes to the 10 implementing agencies. 10% of the legacy appropriation by statute is set aside for acquisition projects, and that requires a 2 to 3 match by the council, and we plan for that in the CIP that you adopt every year. So, I'll be coming to you, you approve that, in December, this late summer, early fall, I'll come back to you with the proposed park CIP, and that one of the pieces that we always program is the required match to Parks and Trails legacy money. So what happens, that's essentially what we're asking you to bring in. We also, just for transparency's sake, we do have some of we list out all the administrative adjustments that are happening, and these are items that we don't need the budget amendment to formally do, but we want to make sure that you see what's happening behind the scenes. And there's a couple things going on here. One is there's money that has been previously adopted into the council budget. It could be state bonds, there could be some Parks and Trails legacy money, and then the parks agencies program that to specific projects when they're ready. So we essentially bring all of it in on the front end so they don't wait for it, and we're not bringing it in piecemeal. We bring all that money in on the front end, and then they allocate that to projects as they are ready. And those projects, there's kind of a list of requirements that those projects have to go through. The projects have to be in an approved master plan. There's all sorts of compliance pieces that are reviewed, and as long as all those check marks are hit, those projects go in. The second piece that you're going to see in the administrative adjustments is there's a handful of acquisition projects that are in the administrative adjustment section. This is the second half of the acquisition projects. The first half of the acquisition projects requires specific council action. So any acquisition projects in this administrative adjustment section, you've taken a different council action to award that specific project, and now we're just putting the money into the right buckets. We bring it in as a general bucket for parks acquisition, and then when the specific projects get awarded, we'll pull out $86,000 for this specific project, or $120,000 for this specific project. So that's what you're gonna see in here, and whenever there was a previous council action, we have that listed. So with that, council members, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions? Hearing none. Thank you very much, Heather. It was great.
Move approval?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. I almost forgot. We have a motion to approve. Second. Okay, now any discussion? All right, hearing none. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carried, thanks to Councilmember Wolf and Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to blame it on the heat. Information items, 2021 plat monitoring report, Raya Ismaili and Caitlin Shampoo. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. Hi, council members. Good afternoon. I'm Raya Ismaili. I'm a senior planner in local planning assistance, and with me here today is Caitlin Shampoo, my colleague. She's an associate planner in local planning assistance. I'll walk you through the program background on the plat monitoring, and then Caitlin will cover the information and analysis that was done in the 2021 report. Oh, perfect. Thank you. So I want to start with a little bit of a big picture with how the data and policy relate to one another here. In the heart of the long-range planning, our comprehensive plan that set the stage for guiding and planning for future land uses, and those accommodate the population growth. The comprehensive plan go through that decennial process. You've seen many of them recently, many amendments to them. So that is a big picture overhaul. And they also have the interim changes through the amendments again. And then the plans provide the basis for land use inventory with the existing land uses. We also receive information on building permits through our research department at the Metropolitan Council, which basically shows the developments that are being built annually at the moment in the region. The data is then complemented by the Agricultural Preserves Program, which my colleague Gabby and myself will talk to you about after this presentation, so you'll hear about that today as well. And then the Agricultural Preserves Program identifies areas that are to be preserved for basically protected from development. So they are to be preserved against development. And then there is the plat monitoring program, which basically tries to capture land that is going to be developed in the near future. So this is the stage between the future land use planning and the permits. So we haven't seen it in either of them yet, basically. And that's exactly why I should mention this, that this program is a credit program. So we're just working on the plans that the communities have for these areas in the short term. Next slide. Perfect. So the plat monitoring program started in 2001. It started with 12 volunteer communities. They started reporting their plats from the year 2000. The program was established with input from the Association of Metropolitan Municipalities, and that is now known as Metro Cities, and the Builders Association of the Twin Cities, which is, I believe, Housing First, right, Lisa? Okay, great. The purpose of the program is, as I mentioned, to monitor residential development, and then include the number of units and the acreage that is being planned for residential development in the sewered areas in the region. And it also captures the mix of single-family and multifamily units of housing and how the land is being consumed over the areas that are being platted. The program basically gives the council an ability to assess the available land supply in the communities that participate in the program, and then helps us monitor the density of new development in these areas as they're coming in to make sure that they are consistent with the council policy for development of the 3 units an acre development density. That is mostly in the developing communities on the edge of the metropolitan urban service area. The communities that participate in this program are asked annually to submit this plat information to us. Again, the Seward residential plats is what we're asking for annually. And these are basically land subdivisions for the most part. And sometimes there are smaller plats that are not quite subdivisions. And we ask for them to be from the previous year with a copy of the plat. And based on this information, we calculate the net acreage of development and take the undevelopable lands out to figure out what the net density of development in these areas are. So the results of the program are not just used for monitoring purposes, but as I mentioned, it's a credit program. So these communities receive that credit for higher density plats, which gives them basically a flexibility in responding to development demands in the market. So when and it allows them to plat lower density developments, so for lower density activities in the region when they have this credit kind of banked. Next slide, please. Perfect, thank you. So on the screen, you see a map of all the participating communities. That's just the general blue currently. There are 45 communities that participate in the annual plat monitoring program. That does include the 12 original volunteer communities that participated in the program. Those are outlined in dark blue and also are on the screen. There are cities of Blaine, Chanhassen, Eden Prairie, Hugo, Inver Grove Heights, Lakeville, Maple Grove, Ramsey, Savage, Shakopee, Waconia, and Woodbury. And, okay. All right, go ahead. There we go. Okay. So the participating communities designation in Thrive MSP 2040 generally corresponds with the suburban edge, emerging suburban edge, and rural center community designations. And there are a couple of communities, though, that currently have the suburban community designation as well. But when they started in the program in the last regional development guide, they were some of the developing communities. They still have land to be platted. With that, I'll hand the presentation over to Caitlin, and thank you.
Thank you, Raya. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and committee members. As Raya mentioned, I'm Caitlin Shampoo, an associate planner in Local Planning Assistance Unit, and in the following slides, I'll cover the findings from our analysis. So this slide, which is also figure 4 from the report, shows the mix of single-family and multifamily units every year since the beginning of the program. And in 2021, communities reported 179 plats, which is the highest number of plats reported in a single year throughout the life cycle of the program, with a total of 6,754 single-family and 3,381 multifamily units. And while the share of single-family units is about 10% higher in 2021 compared to 2020, it's not necessarily abnormal. Throughout the program, we've seen quite a bit of year-to-year variability, but when you look at the housing mix as a whole, the proportion of single-family and multifamily units is nearly equal, with representing 55% and 45% of total plats, respectively, or total units platted. And also, as you can see in this chart, communities reported the highest number of units platted in 2003 with 10,589 units. And after this peak, the number gradually dropped over several years until it reached its lowest in the history of the program in 2009 with 286 units platted. And this was consistent with development proposals and activity when the market crashed. And since 2009, platting activity has gradually increased until 2021, when total housing units nearly reached those 2003 levels. And this graph, which is also figure 7 from the report, compares the actual units platted, so that's that green bar, and the allowable range of units, which is the vertical line that you see in the graph. And this range is determined by the minimum and maximum density allowed by the land use guiding for each plat. And we look at this information to evaluate consistency between platting activity and local land use guidings. And as an example, if all 179 plats or recorded plats in 2021 were subdivided at the highest allowable density defined by the land use guiding, there would be just over 17,000 units platted, which is indicated by that point at the top of the vertical line for 2021. And in 2021, the lowest allowable units was just under 7,000, and highest, as I said, was just over 17,000. And given this range, the actual number of units platted was 10,135 units, which is a little bit below the midpoint of around 12,000 units. That said, as you can see in the chart, throughout the life cycle of the program, communities have mostly platted units around the midpoint of the allowable density range. And especially in recent years, actual platted units has been slightly below the midpoint, which indicates more platting activity for developments with densities toward the lower end of the range in communities participating in the program. And as part of our analysis, we also look at net density of annual platting activity across all communities in the program. And I'll talk a little bit more about how we calculate that. Raya alluded to it earlier as well, in a later slide, but I want to point out that we use net density both in plat monitoring and when reviewing planning documents so that our analysis focuses only on developable land areas. That said, I want to focus your attention to the top line, the green line, which shows the overall net density in participating communities since the beginning of the program. And as you can see, since 2000, communities have reported annual platting activity at a variety of densities. And apart from 2009, during the market crash, the overall net density of development has been consistently at or above the council's net density policy of 3 units per acre. And this includes 2021, when the overall net density of development was 4.6 units per acre for participating communities, which is just a slight increase from 4.4 in 2020. And I also want to note that while this data gives us some insights into development patterns in communities on the developing edge, it's only one part of the information that we use to assess consistency with regional policy. In order to have a more complete and comprehensive picture of a community's overall density, we look at plat monitoring data, but we also look at comprehensive plans, amendments, and sewer permits as well. And as I mentioned earlier, the council uses net density when assessing consistency with regional policy, which is calculated by taking out land considered undevelopable. So this includes wetlands and water bodies, public parks and open space, arterial road right-of-way, and land set aside for future development, which is captured in the other use category. And given that standard components of a development, such as local streets, are not removed when calculating net density, communities are encouraged to take advantage of land available for development through efficient platting practices. And the graph on this slide, which is also figure 9 in the report, shows the breakdown of land consumption by use each year of the program, which we also refer to as land utilization. In 2003, net residential acres represented the highest proportion of platted land compared to other years, meaning less land was identified as undevelopable that year. And this is likely attributed to communities setting aside less land for future development, which is shown by that pink bar at the top representing right around 5% of total acres that year. And as you can see, there was a significant change in 2009 when a greater proportion of land was set aside for future development, which is consistent with the market crash and uncertain development patterns during that time. And since 2009, land utilization has been fairly consistent, with net acres representing about 50% of total acreage each year on average, and that trend continued in 2021. And in Figure 10 of the staff report, this shows the overall platting activity around the region in participating communities. As previously mentioned, these are areas on the developing edge of the region within the Metropolitan Urban Service Area. And as shown by the legend on the left, the yellow and orange colors represent platting activity in the early 2000s, whereas the darker purple and blue colors represent platting activity in more recent years. And in general, we're seeing platting activity in areas near transportation corridors, existing or planned transit lines, and undeveloped areas within communities where they still have room to grow. In the past years, we've also added a section to the report where we analyze the amount of time it takes between platting a site to issuing a development permit. And this is also referred to as lot absorption. So lot absorption shows the availability of platted lots and the community's capacity to issue development permits if the demand is there. And the longer lot absorption indicates that more platted land is readily available for permitting and development, and shorter lot absorption shows a stronger demand and rapid growth in an area. And we track this information to help inform growth patterns, land capacity, forecasting, and permitting processes. And to conduct this analysis, we combined the permit data collected annually by the research unit with the plat data collected from local governments over the course of the program. And I also want to note that the geocoded permit data only goes back to 2009, so this analysis only represents the past 12 years rather than the full life cycle of the program. But that said, this graphic shows that most plats receive development permits within 2 years of a lot being platted, and the 0 represents plats that were permitted within the same year. And in addition to looking at lot absorption as a whole, we conducted a further analysis to break down this information by community designation and type of development. So the chart on the left shows the average time between platting and permitting by community designation. And before getting into too much detail, I want to point out that these graphs don't show the sample size of each designation, which somewhat skews the averages that you see on the screen. So for example, this graph shows that lot absorption was shortest in rural residential communities with less than a year between platting and permitting. However, this average reflects only 1 or 2 plats, given that there's relatively less platting and permitting activity in rural settings. But that said, most platting and permitting activity has occurred in suburban edge and emerging suburban edge communities, with 51% and 39% of overall platting and building activities, respectively. And as you can see from the graph, the average time between platting and permitting was 2.7 years in suburban edge and 3.3 years in emerging suburban edge communities. Additionally, the chart on the right shows average lot absorption by the type of development permit issued. So for accessory dwelling units and duplex, triplex, quads, they have experienced the shortest amount of time between platting and permitting, with 1 and 2 years respectively. However, this is a similar situation as with rural residential communities, where only 1 ADU permit has been issued between 2009 and 2021. Townhomes, which we also refer to as single-family attached, have taken the most amount of time, with an average of 3.7 years, whereas single-family, which represent the majority of plats, about 85%, has taken an average of 2.8 years. And these numbers have either stayed the same or changed very minimally since 2020. And also for those interested, there's a summary of density by community at the end of the staff report. But with that, we're happy to answer any questions you have. Thank you.
Councilmember Lindstrom.
On the last point you made about the lot absorption, so some of these plots, it's taken 5, 10 years, even longer. What are some common reasons for that, for taking such an extensive period of time to get permitted?
Madam Chair, committee member, Brad, do you want to take
Sure.
this one? I think you can answer it best.
Absolutely. Madam Chair, Councilmember Lindstrom, at this point, it will be more on we would be speculating on the actual reason of why that could have potentially happened, but without any additional analysis, which is kind of outside the purview of this program to know the exact reason. But at many points, what we see is development proposal falling through for a variety of reasons. It could be due to financing, it could be due to changing hands between developers, so they end up being replatted potentially several years later. And with that, it basically shows that the first time that it was platted, it was 10 years ago, but then it was replatted, the plans changed and everything. And therefore, the permit came in years later, and that's probably why it's happening. So we think that it's due to reasons that at the local level, potentially with the developments themselves, but nothing that is systemic in the permitting or the platting processes at the jurisdictions.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Well, thank you. This was interesting and very well presented. Great detail.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And next, we have the 2021 Metropolitan Agricultural Preserves Program Report. Mrs. Smiley, and whenever I say that, it sounds like I'm saying Mrs. Smiley. I'm sorry.
That's absolutely okay. That's how I introduce myself.
And Gabby?
Yeah, Gabby.
Gabby Alvera. Thank you.
Great. Good afternoon again. I don't think I need to reintroduce myself. But today I also have my colleague, Gabby Olvera, who is an associate planner in local planning assistance as well. And we will present to you the 2021 report on the Metropolitan Agricultural Preserves Program. So I'll go through the background of the program, and then Gabby will talk about the findings and the analysis on the 2021 program. Great. So the Metropolitan Agricultural Preserves was established in 1980 by the Minnesota legislature, and Metropolitan Council has been monitoring the program since 1982. The program was basically created to encourage the use of agricultural land for food production and provide means for preservation of areas that were planned for long-term agricultural use in the 7-county metro area. The program, through a certification process, designates land that is eligible to enroll in the program, and the communities are expected to plan accordingly for these areas in their local comprehensive plans and their zoning ordinances to allow for the program to happen. The area is then mapped in their comprehensive plans as well. In order to be eligible to be enrolled in this program, parcels need to be at least 40 acres, and they need to remain in the program for at least 8 years. There are some changes or circumstances that smaller acreages can be enrolled, and those are laid out in the statute with specific criteria. And leave my notes for this. One thing that I do want to add, I mentioned the parcels stay in the program for at least 8 years. However, in 2019, the legislature introduced a new provision to the statute that provided a new early termination option for landowners. Previously, there were some early terminations options, but this one is different, that under the new provision, landowners can at any point apply for early termination through their local jurisdictions, and all that is needed is for that local jurisdiction, so either the city council or the town board, to approve that through a majority vote. Agricultural preserves property owners overall receive a property tax reduction as part of this program. That credit comes from the county's conservation fund that is from mortgage registration and deed transfers. And then it also comes from the state conservation fund and state general fund. Gabby will walk through that in more detail in a little bit. The enrollment includes the landowners applying for the program. They provide parcel information and an affidavit from the authority that certifies that parcel for long-term agricultural use, and then the local authority certifies those eligible land by resolution. So with that, I'll hand the presentation over to Gabby to walk through the 2021 findings.
Hello, council members. As Raya said, I'm Gabby, or Gabriela Alvera is my whole name, and I'm an associate planner with LPA. So this figure, did not go forward. So this figure, which is actually not in the report, shows the total acres enrolled in the program in the Twin Cities metro area. As you can see, in year 2000, enrollment dropped. After year 2000, enrollment dropped until 2009, which was the lowest in the program history at just 180,000 acres. And this is also consistent with the market recession. Then enrollment started picking up after the market rebound when landowners began to enroll their land. And after 2009, enrollment was on an upward trend until 2013. But since then, however, there has been a slight decline. In 2021, the program enrollment was over 195,000 acres, and this signifies a 1.4% decrease since 2020. And even with acres falling out of the program in recent years, the program has remained steadily, relatively steady over the past 20 years, as it's only declined 2% overall. Figure 1 of the report illustrates the breakdown of acres by county from 2000 to 2001. Carver County, which is shown in orange, accounts for half of the acres enrolled in the region, with just under 100,000 acres. And this is followed by Dakota County, which is shown in the dark blue, with just under 70,000. Overall, most counties experienced a decline in enrolled acres from the previous year of 2021, except for Anoka County, which was initially at just over 600 acres and increased by 30 acres in 2021. And Scott County increased by just under 800 acres to get it just over 8,700 total acres. And as shown in figure 2 of the report, agricultural preserves parcels are shown on this map in green. And this data is compiled from counties, the Minnesota Department of Revenue, and the legislature, and then provided to local jurisdictions by the council. As you can see on the map, and as mentioned in the previous chart, the enrolled parcels are mostly located in Carver and Dakota counties. And now we'll get into a little bit more funding. So this program, as Raya had mentioned, is funded by a $5 fee that's collected by the counties on mortgage registrations and deed transfers. The counties retain half of this in the County Conservation Fund and send the other half divided equally between the Minnesota Conservation Fund and the state general fund. If the amount in the county conservation fund is not sufficient to reimburse the jurisdictions, then counties get money from the state conservation fund. But if that is not sufficient either, then the money is drawn from the state general fund. So due to the balance of the county conservation fund in 2021, it was necessary to pay $175,000 from the state's conservation fund and the state general fund. And you'll see that on the far right column on the bottom. And this was used to supplement what was paid out of the county, which was $288,000. And that'll be in the middle column at the bottom. And in Carver County, for example, there was just over $30,000 paid out of the county fund to participants. And this is for nearly 100,000 acres. The county had to draw around $142,000 from the state conservation fund and the state general fund to supplement the remainder of the reimbursement. And again, only Carver and Dakota counties had to draw upon additional funds from the state to reimburse their participants. As you may have noted earlier, that these two counties have the highest number of total acres enrolled in the program. And with that, can answer questions.
Questions? Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have a question. I just have a comment that Councilmember Barber and I represent almost all of the ag preserve land in the region.
Yeah.
It's a little bit concentrated.
Yeah. Good work. Anybody else? Well, thank you. Thank you both. This was great.
Thank you.
Oh, I have one quick question. I thought of this earlier as I was reading through the materials. Is there anywhere in the materials that indicates landowners who are BIPOC? Curious.
Madam Chair, the information that we receive from the counties, though it does include property owner names and some of their tax information, it does not include demographic information.
Okay.
So we would be unable to pull that information out of what we receive for this program.
The other question that kind of flew through my mind, and those of you that didn't hear me earlier, I was attempted to do some gardening this morning, and I think I overheated, so I'm not sure my brain's working again yet. But with that decline starting back, and I think it was 2013, is there any background information that indicates that farmers were selling their property? And I'm curious.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Madam Chair, with the information that we've compiled for this report, I would be hesitant to draw that conclusion, but probably with further analysis, we would be able to do that. We would have to go back to information about ownership of those parcels, because just because they sold it doesn't mean it was developed necessarily. It's probably easier for us to draw conclusions on whether or not it came out of the program and it was developed immediately, but not necessarily whether it changed hands.
Right.
But we can certainly try to see if we can add anything to this report
I wouldn't
later.
go to a lot of work on it. I was just curious. Both through a nonprofit that I'm involved with, as well as with IMPAS, you hear a lot about farm families turning over their property for environmental preserves. I've seen it happen in Dakota County. I've seen it happen up in Sherburne. And so I'm always kind of curious as to what changes the figures around. And
Madam Chair, I will also add that if we were to look into something similar, that's probably easier to see now with that new provision that I mentioned with immediate expiration out of the program, whereas if we look back in, like, say, 2013, the properties that came out of the program that year had applied for expiration 8 years before that. So it's a 8 years delay. So it would be a little more difficult to see the impact
Right.
compared to the last couple of years.
Well, thank you
Yes.
again. That was excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And our third item for information is a Metro HRA project-based voucher update from Terri Smith. Welcome, Terri.
Good afternoon, evening. I'm sorry I was so disruptive when I came in today. I wasn't tracking on my time, but thanks for having me, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Terri Smith, and I'm the Director of the Council's Housing and Redevelopment Authority, and I'm here to share just a quick update on the 2022 project-based voucher offer and award. So I guess I don't even need this. So in summary, I always think the slides aren't going to work, so I want my own slides, just in case. Although Greg, you do such a great job, so that's nothing against you. So as a reminder, you will recall that the council's HRA has 6,894 vouchers, and HUD allows housing authorities discretion to project base up to 20% of those vouchers. So instead of being attached to the tenant, they become attached to a unit within the region. The council's HRA currently has 970 of its vouchers attached as project basing, and that represents about 14% of our total voucher allocation. These PBVs are in 55 different developments and 33 communities throughout the region. And the chart at the right is just sort of a different visual that represents that, but today we have 5,924 vouchers that are attached to the tenants, and 970 that are project-based. If we were to allocate a full 20%, we would be able to project-base an additional 408 vouchers. And as we did that, the green piece of the pie would increase and the darker blue piece of the pie would decrease. In terms of policies that you've all adopted in our administrative plan, the policy states that the council will operate a project-based voucher program using up to 20% of its vouchers, that we will offer and award PBVs in the following ways. So either through an independent request for proposals that we issue on our own, or through Minnesota Housing's request for proposals process. You may recall we did some engagement with landlords and owners back in February through a listening session, and overwhelmingly owners wanted us to offer the PBVs independently of Minnesota Housing's RFP. And so we did that in 2020. In 2021, we did not offer any PBVs, and then we did that again this year in 2022. And what that does is gives developers additional scoring and funding points as they're applying for other housing through this large Minnesota Housing RFP process, like tax credits and first mortgage. And then in 2020, you all adopted a policy that prioritizes PBVs in our own operating area before considering projects outside of our service area. And you've seen this map at the left, but I think it's a good reminder, but the yellow areas are where the council's HRA operates, so all of Carver and Anoka counties, and then suburban Hennepin and Ramsey. And the other housing authorities that are listed there have their own voucher program. Some of them have operate PBVs and some do not. So our policy also states that staff considers many variables when determining whether or not to offer PBVs in a given year. So we're looking at our overall voucher utilization. So of our almost 7,000 vouchers, how many are in use? And the answer to that is they're usually all in use most of the time. We look at our current voucher turnover rates. So as you will recall, the PBVs come out of a very small number of turnover vouchers. So as one family goes off the program, another can come on. So we're looking at our turnover rates. We're looking at our funding and our budget, so what does our HUD funding look like? And then we also want to try and balance our PBV admissions with also serving folks on the waiting list. So in 2022, after some discussion with the listening session and some discussion with you all, we ended up offering up to 20 Veterans Affairs supportive housing project-based vouchers. That's a mouthful. We call it VASH PBVs. Thank you, Councilmember Cummings, for pointing out a typo in the business item. I'm thankful that you read it thoroughly, but in one spot, we had 20 vouchers, and in one spot, we had 2. So I'll correct that when I submit the committee report, but it was actually 20. In the VASH program, as you may recall, serves veterans that are experiencing homelessness. So the Housing Authority provides the housing subsidy, and then the Department of Veterans Affairs in Minneapolis, they provide referral and supportive services for veterans that are homeless and disabled. We issued the RFP in March 15th of 2022. Applications were due April 15th of 2022. And we received 2 applications for a total of 9 VASH PBVs. I'm sure you're wondering, knowing the conversations we've had, that PBVs have become increasingly competitive, why we only received 2. And the only assumption we can make is that VASH vouchers serve vulnerable veterans, some that have high barriers, and in order to apply for these VASH PBVs, owners must be willing to accept veterans with high barriers into their housing. And so the HUD rules are pretty strict when it comes to VASH vouchers, and that the reasons you can deny a veteran are very limited, and so some owners are not interested in that. And then the RFP requires projects to receive full funding in 2022 to receive a formal PBV award. So if the development does not get their full funding, then they would have to come through and reapply for PBVs when they are again offered at a future date. So the 2 applications that we received, one was for Carver Oak Senior Residence in Carver County. This is part of a larger redevelopment project. Carver Crossing is also part of this redevelopment project where the council awarded some PBVs in 2020, I believe. But this is a new construction project, proposed 43 units of senior affordable housing, including 1 and 2 bedrooms. They requested 7 VASH PBVs for this development. They do have some VASH already in Carver County, scattered at a few of their development sites that have been successful over the years, as we've had contracts in place with them for a number of years. And they did meet the initial eligibility criteria when we were scoring. So they received a letter of intent from Metro HRA that essentially commits the PBVs as they apply for their additional funding. This particular project is going through Minnesota Housing and requesting tax credits. And so if they get those tax credits and get all their funding this year, then I will be back to you the end of this year, end of December or early January, to formally commit the PBVs to that project. If they don't get their financing, they will need to come back through again at a later date and reapply for PBVs. The second application that we received was for Nolte River Place Apartments in Anoka. This is a Volunteers of America project. It was a proposed new construction 80-unit senior affordable housing development. They already have all their financing committed to this project, so they were just simply looking for the PBVs. These are 1 and 2 bedroom units, but they did not meet the initial eligibility criteria. So the federal regulations allow housing authorities to attach PBVs to new construction or rehabilitative projects or to existing housing. And in order to be attached to new construction, we need to go through all the steps of, the formalities, subsidy layering review, environmental review, and several steps, and enter into an agreement before they break ground, so that before they start construction. In this particular development already broke ground, so they already started construction. And to be eligible as existing housing, the projects need to substantially meet health and safety requirements or HUD's health and safety standards. And in this case, they do not, because they're in the middle of construction. Well, they just broke ground, I think, 2 months ago. So they don't meet either bucket. And so this was a confusing one because it was really simply a timing thing, bad timing. And so we reached out to our funders, HUD, to, get their opinion on this, to see, there's so much gray area And there just really wasn't a way for us to award to this. So this project will have to come back through again as existing housing when we offer PBVs again in the future, if they still want them. They do have several other rental assistance units that the whole project is geared towards serving veterans. And so they do have other forms of subsidy in the development that will help them achieve those goals. And so the next steps here will be in December or January. If Carver Oaks receives all of their funding through Minnesota Housing, I'll be back with formal action to award the 7 vouchers to Carver Oaks. And then in February of 2023, we will doing engagement again with landlords, owners and developers, and with you all on the potential offer and award of PBVs for 2023 and what that might look like. And that's all I have, Madam Chair, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yes, Councilmember Lindstrom.
Thanks. So the folks that will be receiving these vouchers will be living in these new homes, will be receiving case management and clinical services. And I have an idea of what that may mean, but I'm hoping that you can expound on the types of services that these folks will be able to partake in.
Sure, Madam Chair and Councilmember Lindstrom. So each person, individual, family is different in terms of the services they need. Some of them are basic life skills, some of them are getting them connected to more mainstream services, some may be mental health referrals, they could be chemical addiction issues. So I think it runs the gamut, but each veteran that's referred from the VA are eligible for VA services, and they have a case manager through the VA that provides those services. And they're not required to take the services. There was a day when VASH vouchers, it was required that they accept the services or they could lose their voucher. Now it's voluntary on the part of the veteran, but oftentimes if we see a veteran having an issue with lease compliance or an issue with their landlord, then we will try to reconnect that case manager with the veteran to keep that veteran stably housed. So we have a close working relationship with the VA in that way.
Thank you.
Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a couple questions. First of all, I'm kind of wondering where we are in housing our homeless veterans. That's one question. My other one is, can you give us sort of a range of how long it takes? I know these things are incredibly complicated, putting all the pieces of financing together to accomplish. What's kind of the range of time it takes to actually put together that financial package to allow these developments to happen?
Madam Chair and Councilmember Cummings, it's incredibly complicated, and I'm not an expert in that space, but certainly we've funded projects with vouchers that have attempted to get their tax credits 4 or 5 years in a row because the tax credits are incredibly competitive, and the funding that's available for affordable housing, from the big picture of things is incredibly competitive. So I think, it can take many, many years. And so that's one of the reasons why we require that developers come back through and reapply, so we're not holding those vouchers for, 4 or 5 years at a time. And then I forgot the second part of your question.
Where are we in housing our homeless veterans?
Yes, thank you for that, Madam Chair and Councilmember Cummings. All the continuums of care within the state have achieved a net zero of homeless veterans with the exception of Hennepin County and Ramsey County. And so the Minnesota Department of Veterans Affairs, they have a veterans registry that they operate, and so lots of progress has been made in our state. Actually, St. Croix County might be a third county that still has a handful of homeless veterans, and some of them are VA eligible, so eligible for VA services, and therefore the VASH program, some of them are not. But I think the idea is the veterans that remain experiencing homelessness are some of the hardest housed veterans and have real high barriers.
Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you. Just a follow-up comment. This is one piece of housing that you have to handle. And I just, and I think somebody says it every time, but you take such complicated programs and make them understandable and help us to really grasp how complex the entire issue is for the HRA, you and your staff. And it's pretty amazing, and thank you for the work that you do, which is so important, but also then being able to distill it into understandable pieces as we move through, our meetings. So thank you for that.
Madam Chair, if I may, just in response to that, I'd like to credit Chong Lau. She's our manager, our HRA manager that oversees the VASH program and works very closely with the Department of Veterans Affairs, and coordinator Lisa Elizondo is the HRA coordinator staff person that works daily close with those folks. And we've made great strides in additional lease-ups with our VASH program during the last part of 2021 and 2022. So I just want to give kudos to them because they're doing the hard work.
Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to thank you for answering the question about why does it matter if they broke ground? It's a really dumb rule, but finding out that it's a federal rule helps me to understand it, but it's also disappointing because if it was our dumb rule, we could fix it, but because it's a federal dumb rule, we can't.
That was eloquent.
Madam Chair and Councilmember Wolf, and it's interesting, we've been doing PBVs for 20 years and we've never come across this issue before. One of the things we want to dig in with owners and residents and you all is, should we have some sort of a minimum on the number of PBVs we will award? It's a lot of work to do a contract and bring a development online for just 2 PBVs. So it's one of the things we'll be digging into with stakeholders early next year.
Well, and you would almost think that it would be beneficial for those residents who are veterans to have a little bit more of a community in their dwelling. And from an economy of scale, to provide those supportive services, it just makes sense, so. Well, thank you, excellent. Well done. So, do you have anything to report for us, Lisa?
Thank you, Madam Chair, council members. I wanted to get on your calendars early before not our next CDC, but our August 15th CDC meeting. We'll have an open house of intern work that we've had with our community development interns this year, showcasing the projects they've been working on. It'll be just right outside of here in Chambers, all things being safe and everyone being healthy, and we'll plan for that starting at 3 o'clock. Drop in if you can, see some of the work our new career folks have been doing here on behalf of the council. We're really excited to share with you, and they're really excited to, and probably a little nervous to talk with policymakers about their work, but a great opportunity to learn about that work. So that's August 15th at 3 o'clock, right before our CDC meeting, and we'll share that as part of our scheduler as well, so you have that for your calendars.
Great, excellent. Councilmember Lee.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I actually had a question for Lisa with that. Did I remember one of the new planners that came up here with Raya earlier, did they start as an intern?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Lee, that's correct. Caitlin Shampoo started as an intern with us and is now an associate planner.
Oh, yeah, that's really cool.
Cool.
And I really like her name. Anyone else? Well, I don't know if anybody else did this, but on my way in, I looked at my car thermometer and it said 100 degrees. So Chair Zelli frequently says, go enjoy this beautiful day. I'm just gonna, I don't know about you guys, but I'm going home to find some air conditioning, so.
The bus was 72 degrees, I will tell you that.
Pardon?
The bus was 72 degrees, so very comfortable. Take turns.
Excellent. Everyone take good care. This meeting is adjourned.